Miles away? I think not. I saw the setup occurring in the cloud patterns from where I was, knowing that tonight would be very likely spectacular to illustrate the placement of the sun in the clouds. And that's also what I'm highlighting here. The position of the sun vanishing from this perspective or setting is considerably more west. It was way over there just even a month ago. Now it's right over here. Take a close look at that cloud that the sun is nestled in the midst of. What do you make of that? The reason why I do this and the reason this is important is simply because of the mass satanic mind control programming that's inundating the population of the world. And I'm one of the individuals that will help you to see this world in a different perspective. That's why I do this. Look at the hot spot in the middle of the top of that cloud. Pretty interesting, isn't it? For that is, we're not on a spinning globe.
So that's what I'm talking about, or what the ancestors was talking about when they were saying that all things that appear to be as aren't, but what is always will be. You know what I mean? Like, we're in a phase now at the time of this so-called conjunction, that these type of things are, how do you say, commonplace, meaning that these spectacular events that we, based upon our world structure, how we were taught the world is or exists, is now changing, right? But what's happening is they're trying to keep the people's mind state about the reality the same. And the only way to do that is to create perpetual lies. But those lies create a perpetual entity, void, that becomes something that has to be satiated by the last one. You can go to my Facebook page, get the link. Aseer Ali Cordova. Bless you. So all of these so-called occultists, right, and people from the last century that basically bit all of Pascal Beverly Randolph, Black Herman, Pamplin the Devil, Prince and Princess Mysteria. These were different, Madame Laveau. These type of beings at the time were really still maintaining a lot of the ancient stuff, even though the only way to really be protected was to have a public face. So while Randolph was writing speeches and doing what he was doing, he was also still politicking to create and interpret the Ansaratic mysteries that went into the death, disembodiment of man, and rights of Euless and all of that stuff. You know what I mean? And based on his understanding and being able to ritually practice it all is what gave him and put him in the position to basically rule and become Lord of all the Rosicrucians in the world at the time, which at the time was still heavily melanated, because the aristocracies of these countries and stuff, and the so-called black nobilities was still all doing their own thing, and then manipulating the so-called white Slavic populace that they're now using to colonize the rest of the so-called world, based upon their so-called divine right to rule, based upon them believing that they are descendant from one of the so-called root races. You understand? So people like Madame Blavatsky and these people who you watch, when you're watching Lovecraft Country, you're watching Madame Blavatsky. You're watching Madame Blavatsky's interpretation of it. You know what I'm saying? You're not watching Randolph's interpretation of it, because Randolph's whole system was based on love. You know what I'm saying? Whereas the right hand path, that whole stuff was based on the left hand path, which is why you have so many Caucasian people and so much satanic magic, and Caucasian people trying to grab themselves into black bodies and all of that. Understand? Because the person that's giving that to you most likely was trained or had that type of sentimentality in the illustration of the characters, which also explains why the original man had to die. You understand? Because they still have to follow the ritual of the circumstance in order for the whole thing to go over. You understand? And in every Western occultic ritual, there has to be a sacrifice. You see? But it's not like that in higher forms of magic. The sacrifice is what you give up, not like what you give up to die. Is what you give up to live. You understand? That's why cutting chickens and doing all that, you ain't gotta do all that no more. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's that really gonna do at this point? But satiate some iridescent, intangible entity that's there sucking all of that up, and now it's tied to you based upon what you now have given, which then becomes an urge, again, a demi-urge. You see what I'm saying? To now get you to want to do that again to get some sort of result. You understand? Man becomes the fool for the divinity he worships. So it's just as much as a divine movement. It's national movement. It's a divine movement too, which means that the spiritual aspect of it is what's functioning with it. So these people who pay all of these money for these degrees and these aprons and all of that, they got to go through different arcane sexual rituals to embody what it is they will never really understand, because they've gone through it that way. And if they do, they got to break out of that, you know what I'm saying, to redeem themselves, to now take what they now know to a higher level, even though they now know that they tainted. You know, you dig? And so that's that they're speaking into existence, them happening. That's the situation. So you don't want to say things like, what are we going to do when they come to vaccinate? No, it's going to be like, they're not coming to vaccinate me or anybody I know. And that's the mantra that everybody throws out. You understand? Because that mantra is going straight now to the so-called polar race. But see, we understand the word polar, right, as what? Arctic. You understand? So when they say that they discovered or they're chilling with the polar race at the Arctic, the Nazis is with the polar race at the Arctic, at the North Pole, right? They're saying you and I think they're talking about the Arctic. So that way, that makes us think then these polar people, right, are like some sort of snow white, whatever people. But polar is short for polarity or Polaris. And Polaris is a what? It's a star, right? So we're talking about bioluminescent, non-real physical being, if we're talking about anybody of any merit who exists at a certain juncture, right, on the planet that for some reason they don't want nobody else to go to that don't have their own government. Think about that. So when they talk about the polar race, they're talking about, like I said, a non-physical people. These are the beings that allegedly existed at the time before time, right? Before there was whatever. So these things are not even physical, non-physical. The best we could describe them or have seen them, right, in circumstance, now I'm only speaking, would be like an example of a polarity, right? Would be something like this. Remember they showed you this? This character was actually started out as a so-called white man, became this bioluminescent character, and then became a so-called black man in the TV show. But the TV show is not a continuation necessarily of the movie. It was a continuation of the comic book. So what were they doing? They were taking the literary aspect. It's the first time the literary, let's say, aspect of something became the precursor to the visual aspect of it. And once it became thing, now when I did the book, I wrote a book called Morphogenetic Cosmology in Comics, and I talked about back in 2009, and in it I talked about how this was actually by Dr. Manhattan was actually a black man, and that the character in the comic book Osterman actually becomes black, but he had no imagination, meaning no pineal function. So he has this power with no pineal activation. That's why it's funny that when they did the actual show now, they had it the black man who has the pineal activation but no imagination. You see what I'm saying? In order to be activated, he had to give it as an egg, right? To what? To who? The black woman. Showing again what? The original man, the original woman is God. Just like in Lovecraft Country. The original man and the original woman is God. The original man and the original woman is the gateway back to this type of situation. Why? Because the original man and original woman are the examples, are the continuation of this. So at this period that these things would, what we'll call, or what they call Polarians existed, right? They existed at such a high frequency at a time in what we would call pre-creation. So these things, you know what I mean? This is a grand universe, but it's only really one sun. But the sun is so massive, you see, that after the course of the 25, well, they say 24,000 years. We were taught in the supreme mathematics and the actual facts that it was actually 24,896 years that was rounded to 25,000, which then renews our history every 25,000 years. So every 25,000 years begins, the end of 25,000 years technically begins the year one in the long count astrological calendar. You understand? So that's the calendar. Now think about this. This is the calendar that you and I and our people used to live under. You understand? So death as an occurrence was not something that was thing. That's why we seen that the sun died and rose every day. Every day was your death and resurrection. The sleep cycle is the reinforcing cycle that we get from the projection, which we call the sun, that for whatever reason exists on both sides of the spectrum. So these so-called Polarians are what we would consider things like that. So the Polarians of the Egyptian caste were people like Amen. You understand? Remember in Spider-Man, Jamie Foxx, when they hit him with the electricity, he turned bioluminescent blue, right? Doom. when they take the Milan spice, the melanin, right? What happens? Their eyes turn deep royal blue like this, right? When the jellyfish and the octopus about to turn into a different color, right, in the blink of an eye, what happens? You see this blue first or whatever, and this is what happens. The deeper into the deep Bermuda Trench you get, everything is bioluminescent. So think about that now. Now think about this, you or beings, or you existing as a being like this, where by the end of this cycle, right, you have a great coming together or coming apart, depending on how you see it. This is another example of it. This is from the Kurdish people. The Kurdish people worship the blue god. This is the word. The blue god Malik Tas. They also call the Yazidis or the Yazidis. But Malik Tas is like a black man to them. This is a white version. I'm looking for the other one I have. Look, black. The hair. Oh yeah, here you go. No. They call him the Peacock King. Malik Tas, again, Malik meaning Malik, meaning teacher. Tas meaning like Taurus, like the Taurus fields. So they massacre these dudes, the Kurdish people and all of that, because they still are connected to this. They worship the black god or the black blue god, Malik Tas, in real life, and they peacocks and all that. So all peacocks are representative of this entity, this energy, this so-called Polarian or pre-creation bioluminescent energy. You understand? Because purple and red, right? I mean, like red and blue make purple. So the red in the blood, the DNA, and then the blue in the RNA mix, you see, and then become this thing that allows the melanin carbon to activate and create a bioluminescent field. What they are trying to understand is how it's adaptive. This is why they're studying melanin like that, because that's the binding aspect of it. The same thing that allows octopuses and all that stuff to do that. What we have is in melanin. There's another version, you see? But we'll get to them in a minute. These are the Aryans. These right here, Egyptians, they represent the Atlanteans. If we were looking at that cosmology, I'm talking about in terms of the root race people. This would be the Aryans, this would be the Atlanteans. But we'll get to that. So these essentially, though, when you see them in the blue depiction, they're referring to the Polarian strain, which is the so-called high spiritual plane that exists in the central core of what we refer to as the plane, where all of the so-called pyramids, mounds, all that stuff is referred to. This is the old news, though. This stuff we done read about in the Emerald Tablets, in the Time and the Technosphere, in the book the Dendrite Calendar, because these are all the calendars: the Mayan calendar, the Dendrite calendar, the Nagite calendar. It's all this. They all following different aspects of the short and the long count, but it's the same aspect from one age to the next, from one so-called race handing it off to the next. Understand? But what they got us thinking is that all these races was like all these different people, when these in between that you have so-called races or subgroups that come out of the mixture of the last two. Okay, so the Polarian race, you saw them. Those is the, you understand? So now we'll look at the Hyperborean race. Now, if you want to find what happened with the rise of the Hyperboreans after the fall of the Polarians, you will read the book, the old text of what they call the Ramayana from the old text. You could also get a book called Chariots of the Gods. Is also the origin of Wotan, who they eventually call Odin or Odin, son of Bull. Right? So these Polarians wound up in the area that we'll call the polar region. See, so the polar region is where these type of beings exist, which is usually a cold place with nobody at. That don't mean that these people are cold-based, you understand, Nordic or white people, you understand? Because they're not even physical like that all the time. But what they are, they have elements of this bioluminescent energy within them. Got it? So when these white people's talking to you about the Pleiadians and, you know what I'm saying, all of this stuff, they're trying to bring, they putting their salt on it so that way they could act like this is really directly them. And it is to a context, but it's not in it like where like you're not in it. You see what I'm saying? Like they always have it where you're in it, but you're always somehow under them. So we're dispelling all of that. So this is again what all of these Golden Dawn, the Lemite, Order of Set, Temple of Set, Church of Saint. This is what all these niggas is really trying to get tapped into, but they coming in from the left-hand path. So they trying to get into heaven through the back door. Actually, they trying to dig a tunnel to it. Understand? And they know nowadays we ain't going where it's cold. So we ain't gonna, you know what I'm saying? We're gonna wait till it thaw out and then go up there. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the natural cycle. That's how it's always been. You understand? We're practical people. Have always been. So now we get to the Hyperborean age. This is the age with those of us that grew up in the 80s when they was forcing us all of the extra testosterone masculinity and the fantasy era mixed with the science fiction era. Conan, you remember Conan? Conan existed in the Hyperborean period. So these Hyperborean people, again, were the inheritors, the first race after the Polarians. Understand? And these beings, if you will, were of a higher, you know what I'm saying, standard, because they now have they are the first, this is the first, let's say, physical aspect. This is now where reality is now anchored into being. You understand? So now things is current and things is becoming more physical. So now these are the beings that's running it, carrying over from that. This is now the beginning of the next 24,000 years. This is where these dudes come in, right? So if we was to see them today or try to compare it visually today, it would be people like this. You know what I'm saying? We think that the way that we look now is the way that we are. So imagine you, the way that you look now, but you like this tall, right? Or imagine if you mad tall right now, you being like the size of like a dwarf or something. That's how it is. It's you, but it's you in the form that you're in to relate that. Back then, it's more UV, direct. You understand? So it's more of us hitting. In any UV system, the more UV the situation, the bigger the things grow, right? Trying to find this other thing. Hold on. So that's this is another example of, let's say, Hyperborean, right? Here we have who they call Nimrod, right? And then we have the Assyrian so-called god, and then we have El in the middle. So these, like I said, would be reminiscent to Hyperborean. You see how you got the lion in the headlock, right? Right? See how you got the 5 on the left, 2 on the right? See how you got the fez and the turban? This is the oldest, this picture right here in the left is the oldest depiction of so-called God from the Akkadian, I believe. Right? So these would be representations of that. So when we think about the ancient Canaanites, Moabites, right? All of them type of people, this is who we're kind of like building on, you know? When we talk about, then we go to who else? No, one second, guys. Uh, yeah. This is from the theosophic depiction of a graph from the Theosophic Society, which were the people who took Randolph's stuff after he died through the Rosicrucian order that they turned white through his son Osiris Buddha Randolph and turned into that. So look, right? Look, 650 BC, 640 AD, Carthaginians uncovered to this size an earthquake from the Sumerian, right? See, Sumerians, Mauryan, Moors, Bosphorus uncovered one more. So then we move into France, right? They get a little smaller, go to the 1630s. So between these times, right, is what we're talking about. So when you're talking about the Carthaginians, you understand? When it talks about how the Nephilim came down and lay with women and their children became giants among men, when you talk about the Carthaginians, you understand? He wasn't no joke. And look at all of this area in between. See? Because all of this was still connected and then broke apart and then got connected again. This was also verified by Edgar Casey for those people that are into white spiritualists as well as Annie Besant, as well as Manly P. Hall, as well as Stugart, as well as Faust, and all of the rest of them. And then that got translated through English academia into the works of Malthus and Hobbes and Nietzsche and Darwin and the rest of these intellectual reprobates. So this shows you how far we are. This is why we're so big as people, or can be this big and it can be this big. Okay, so these are the Hyperboreans, right? That's the ones who after 25,000 years took control. from the so-called Polarians, right? Then we get into the Lemurians. Now, these are the ones that now inherit the first two. So now this is 24 is what? They done inherited both ages from the non-physical to the, so they still have more energy, right, left over from that period. You understand? And so that energy is then transliterated into the physical dominion now of the earth. This is where the mapping and the civilizations and the actual real high building and all of that stuff starts, right? So the Lemurians, if we were to hypothesize based on the writings and all of that, who they are, they would be people like this. Hold up. Oh, yeah. Okay. It would be like this. You know what I'm saying? They bring in real high science down, they physical, but now through their interrelationship with nature, they're able to cultivate, speak to plants, travel to the astral realms, do all of that. You know what I'm saying? But like the end of every age, towards the end, it all starts switching up. So based on the imagery, you can tell what cultures fall into this epoch. The epoch is a specific distance or realm of time, and then within that realm of time exists sub-realms of time that all basically eventually synchronize. Right? So as you see, they still all basically melanated. We didn't get into no thing yet with not to bring color into it, but color is always taken out of it, and that's how you know they throwing a G in it. So we got to always put it back in, and we just show to prove different elements of the same that, whether they be representations of that, because that's all we really have in the abstract anyway. And they can't definitively prove that what we're talking about is not, because everything we're talking about is based on what they deal with in their version of spirituality. So at the fall of this 24,000 years cycle, or 25,000 year cycle. Then we start year one again with now the so-called Atlantean race. You see? And so these Atlantean races are the ones that are dealing now also with the deluge period. So this is why the Phoenicians, again Carthaginians, like we saw, had so much dominance during this era in which the law of the sea and all of that was established. Right? And they now, or we now, are inheriting all of this energy from these previous races and now consolidating that in the so-called priesthoods that then sit as the pinnacles of the cultures that are now experimenting with these high sciences of all the three elements before them. Because all of us were incarnated from this, or with the element of that so-called bioluminescent energy, right? That we will build on what exactly that represents. So in the biblical context, when we go to Genesis chapter 12, verse 8, it'll see that he removeth the thence unto the mountain on the east of Beth El, right? Who they also call Bethel, which we also know is Bethlehem, or Bethel, or the helm of Bethel, or the helm of the Bay and the Eel, which was like one of the main ancient spots we was at, which we now today call Pittsburgh, on the west. And on the hill on the east, they were building an altar unto the Lord. Boom. Then 9. And a beam journey, right? Going still toward the south. And therewith the famine, and therewith Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there for the famine in the grievous land. And then it came to pass he was to come near and to enter into Egypt. He said the south, right? But he had to go up into the east. Right? Then stop yawning. Hold up. And when we look at the Peri Reis map, right, which is the oldest map of the Western Hemisphere, it sits Brazil in where what we would consider Canaan and Mesopotamia and all of that to be, and Antarctica directly below that. So what that means then is that all of this ancient stuff that they keep telling us is over there is like the story version of the stuff that they built. And all of the stuff that they're preserving over here, they let go into ruin. Right? That then brings us then to the close of Atlantis, right? Which really is the famine and the flood that we just read about, right? That destroyed all of these places, that then led to a deluge where all of the land was then raised up and connected again. The first of that land to raise out of the deluge is the land that they refer to as America, right? The land of the eagle, which in the zodiac represents the scorpion. The Atlanteans, i.e. the Phoenicians, right? Descendants of the Canaanites, Moabites, Amorites, who themselves were Atlantean, Lemurians, and Hyperborean, right? Were all always seeded through this Polarian aspect, or what we refer to as Polarian, which is really probably just a representation of life. You know what I mean? As the spark, which they now want to isolate and use, which we'll get into in a minute. So now we get into what they call the Aryan race. So again, Aryan, that's white people, right? Well, it's more like this. Because when you talk about Aryan, you're talking about Old Dravidian, Harappan Indus, who eventually went into places like what we call Mongolia or Tartary, right? And developed into what we'll refer to as the so-called Asian cultures, right? Another aspect of that Aryan would be this as well, because they have the same origin or derivative point. Mm-hmm. These are the ones that carried themselves up into what we call Europa and hooked up with the Grimaldis that was already there, and then established what we'll call, thank you, and established what we'll call the European nobility and monarchs and all of that. You understand? This is still, we're not counting the ones that came after. So after them now, right, as they now recede to the back, not wanting to give up direct power, they manifest a uh, a decoy system to be able to rule, right, or to give up elements of rule to then rule over elements of those who, you see what I'm saying, who they feel genetically that they was over, being that if you had descendancy or elements of the last so-called epoch race, then you got to get up out of here. The same way the white boys did the so-called Neanderthals. You understand? Like I said, you get me up at House of L. I'll get to you as soon as I can. This will be up at House of L at hotmail.com. Again. And then we'll set something up. Like I said, I do deal with that like individually. So this whole, going against and turning races against each other, it's really hard to do that when you're really dealing with the same people. However, that are allowing another later group to try to dominate their position. And because people are economically vied in them doing that, like when they say, oh, the shareholders of Pfizer, the shareholders of that, there's a lot of black shareholders of Pfizer and Monsanto and all of that too, It's not all Caucasian people or Asian people, Indian people. It's a lot of black people invested in that. You know what I'm saying? Destruction and the killing. Okay. Okay. So the word, yeah, there's a lot of original wealthy people invested in stuff like that. A lot of black people invested in private prisons, a lot. And a lot of them pay into these same political parties, and they use so-called white supremacy and stuff like that to act like they against it when these niggas is getting checks off of it. All right, that's what's going on. So participating, and however they do in their fashion or want you to do in their fashion is then your tacit consent to saying that that's okay. So unless you make specific declarations or proclamations to the contrary, then that means that you're basically just another aspect of property, which is why Moors or nationals are the only ones that go to such great lengths to establish a distinction between them. So God forbid anything goes down, there's a real remedy towards it. The word Maghreb is the Arabic term literally meaning place of the setting sun. We just saw the sun in the beginning, right? And hence the west. It derives from the root word ghurub, right? Meaning to set or to be hidden, like Amen, right? The hidden one. It is also used in a manner similar to the metaphorical use to be eclipsed, which is used in English. It's interesting, right? So then when we look at a deeper aspect of it, it brings us to this. The etymology of the word Moor can be traced to the Phoenician term Mahur, Mahurin, meaning Westerners, right? The Semitic etymon of Mahurim referred to the people of the West. The term Maghreb meant the West or the place where the sun sets. The greater Maghreb referred to the further West, while Maghreb al-Aqsa meant the extreme West. According to Lawrence Waddell, early Phoenician titles such as Moru, Mer, or Morutu can be translated as meaning of the Western Sea, right? The Akkadian Amoru, right, occur in the geographical terms meaning literally the West. In Sumerian, the Amorites were known as the Martu or the Tindum, in Akkadian by the name of Amaru, and in Egypt as Amar, and all of which meant Westerners, or those of the West, meaning that wherever these people was at, they was referred to as Moors. You see? It must be noted that the Hebrew terms Marab or Mareb or Maraba or Maharab or Ma'arab also mean West. The Hebrew Mahor also means Westerner. So then when we look at the extension of that, who these Westerners actually are, the army of Toledo, mustering the army of Toledo against Castile, both knights and foot soldiers, he went to the land of the Moabites. So we know that Toledo is Ohio, right? And that Castile at the time was lower in New Mexico. The Hagarenes carried to many messages. Boom, boom, boom. The Arabs and the Moabites. Again, the Moabites, the Beni Moak, or the Beni Morash is their Hebrew name. And so the barbarians, which was the term frequently used by the author to designate the other terms for Moors, which was pagans, Hagarenes, Ishmaelites, Chaldeans, Moabites, Amorites, and Saracens. Generally, though not quite invariably, he used the biblical names as it was because that was found in his lexicons, basically. So when we're talking about that the original French-Algerian conflict and all of that, that had its repercussions in what eventually became Algeria in the 1950s, I believe, or 60s. Earlier aspects of those battles was fought here. But we have them mislisted as other things. Right? So, yeah, the Westerners. Yes, like they refer to them as that in the Game of Thrones. You're right. These two, I'm more from Facebook, sent me this. It's from the book The More That Was. My first introduction to the Moorish court was in 1887, only a very few months after my arrival in Morocco, when I was invited by the British minister, the late William Kirby Green, to accompany his mission to the Sultan. Mulai Hassan has often been the zenith of his power. He was a strong sultan, probably cruel and certainly capable. His energy was never failing, and he maintained order among his lawless tribes and stamped out the constantly occurring revolts by an almost unceasing progress through the country, accompanied by his rabble of an army. He seldom spent 6 months together in any of his several capitals, and the Moors had a saying, the imperial tents are never stored. The great laborer, the enormous transport, the journeyings necessitated the difficulty in the approach. So basically, again, you see that this Sultan was here and he was fighting these revolts against his jurisdiction in the Maghreb. You understand? I think they're innate in us, and I think the only reason why they haven't moved collectively on it, because they know if they do, it's all whatever's there is going to activate, and they don't know how to really deal with that in real time. So they try to kidnap people, do tests on them and stuff like that to see what they can access from it. Create movies and TV shows that activate that within our minds, and then try to hack our dreams to be able to do that. You can read about that right now. MIT is working on another device to hack your dreams. Again, this is Amaru, the home of the northern Semites. So the Babylonians, again from down south, eventually became the people that we know as the Mesopotamians, or collectively referred to as these Mesopotamians. These Mesopotamians eventually became Mayans and all that. But before that, see what I'm saying? In the age before that, they was Olmecs. See? Everything translates down. But the glue that I'm seeing in our era that kept it all together was the Moorish Empire, from the perspective of it being over here. Right? Like, look, this is Will Chamberlain when he was in Conan, playing the dude in the Hyperborean age, standing next to the Neanderthal, Andre the Giant. Look at his hairstyle, and then look at the mane of both the so-called Egyptian from over there, allegedly, and the one from over here. You see the difference? He died of degenerative bone disease and all that. He ain't died from none of that. He taller than him. Look at the shape of the skull. This right here, right, is the Atlantean. This was the people, or the beings that was basically coming into some sort of this sort of reality, you see, at the fall of the age before him that led to the Aryan. That's Will Chamberlain. You know what I'm saying? So, look, this is a map again from America. And we got Carthage, Andalusia, Castile, Morocco. It's a septentrional map. All on the same map. And these are cities. You see how they're all cities? But Castile isn't. You don't see no castle. You don't see no structure drawn next to it, do you? Remember, the whole conflict came from the sale that was made, and that sale led to the destruction of everything. There's another map with Granada on it, further up now though. See, the other thing is that they don't really let us see the original maps that our own people drew of the stuff. We see it from the cartographers and stuff they captured after the wars and all of that. But essentially, that stuff is still obscure to us. That's why the Moorish Empire was so important, because that is what translated and brought everything to the current forefront and maintained everything in this so-called natural order of stuff, which is why the layout of the Alhambra and such of the Moorish structures was always laid out in the aspect of the original compass. This is why all civilizations, like I said, began in the south. So even these maps we're looking at, I'm just showing that to us in a relative sense now, but we should always remember this really upside down. And so now we are at the end of this age, and so they want to harness that energy and use it as a weapon of identification. I can find it. Yeah. Now, I didn't name it this. This is what they call it. Luciferase is a genetic term for the class of oxidative enzymes that produce the bioluminescence and is usually distinguished from a photoprotein. The name was first used by Raphael Dubois, who invented the words luciferin and luciferase. This guy, Raphael Dubois, was also a high-ranking Satanist, a member of a couple of occult societies. So there you go. From the substrate enzyme, respectively, both words are derived from the Latin word lucifer, meaning light bearer. The luciferases are widely used in biotechnology for microscopy and reporter genes. See? For many of the same applications as fluorescent proteins. However, unlike fluorescent proteins, luciferases do not require an external light source, but do require an addition of luciferin, the consumable substrate. Okay? The luciferase can be produced in a lab through genetic engineering for a number of purposes. The luciferase genes can be synthesized and inserted into organisms or transfected into cells. Mice, silkworms, potatoes are just a few of the organisms that have already been engineered to produce the protein. You see? This is why genetic manipulation is so important to the Aryan phase, because these are the guys that phased themselves out and created a caste system to make themselves white. I think to make it easier for them to become bioluminescent while at the same time not be the very thing that represents the last ages that was ruling over. That's just my extrapolation. This allows observation of biological process. This light excitation is not needed for luciferase bioluminescence. There is a minimal autofluorescence and therefore virtually background-free fluorescence. Therefore, as little as 0.2 PG can still be accurately measured using a standard scintillation counter. A scintillation counter is a device that when they hit on top of your skin produces whatever the thing they put in you is there. So it creates almost like, you know, when they produce the 3D hologram. Or think of it like when you go to a club and they stamp your hand and then you only see it under the bioluminescent. Think of that now being put under your skin. So that way when they read it, that's the only time it comes up, because their UV is conscripted to 0.2 PG to be able to read it, whereas if you did it, you wouldn't be able to see it. So that means they could put it in you and you not know. You understand? So just so you know, they're trying to pass laws to be able to vaccinate your children, parents to allow them to vaccinate your children and not tell parents. They're trying to make that a law somehow. So as you see, this thing is moving towards the point where this energy, this Luciferian. So when they talk about Luciferians, this is what they experience or are also pulling out of the adrenochrome that they are living off of and harvesting out of the children and everything else they're taking it from. You understand? Because they're trying to unify with the light bearer that they believe exists in the enzyme. You understand? So when you think of Luciferian now and these people, you got to think of it on a higher level. These people, and the Satanist thing is not just them to doing this. This is them exciting the blood, exciting the enzymes to a certain point, and creating a vibrational frequency through whatever death ritual they created to be able to harvest that spiritual energy as well as the bioluminescent energy out of the experience of everybody that's witnessing shit. Think of how many people clicked on to look at the what you call the King Bond autopsy picture. Think about that. Think of the ops that went and actually posted it, because they say it was niggas, but you don't know who it is. It could be the algorithm itself. You're not dealing with humans anymore. You're dealing with the ailing epoch of the Aryan system that at its height was Tartary. And at its midpoint was like Russia under the Moorish czars when it was here in America. And then it fell specifically after that. So this is what's in the Moderna joint that they trying to peddle to everybody as the vaccine. That's in it. That's how they're going to be able to know if you got it or not. The card is just the placebo. Yeah. Where they going to put it? They're going to put it in the right hand. So that alone, you see? So again, the people that are running this and anybody that voted for this whole system or whatever are the enemy of humanity, whether they know it or not. Because this is the world as it's going to be revealed. And so as everything happens, as you'll see when you go to that diagram, when you go to that page with Martin Kinney, you'll see that as every age comes up, the old age is pushed to the outer circle. So those that's on the outer rim of it, not able to take the change, not able to partake in it, that haven't been prepared like what we're doing right now, is going to have their own experience and have to fall under whatever dictatorship or whatever they're dealing with. Those of us that's striving to do better is going to be able to allegedly interact with this, whether physically or non-physically. But to do it non-physically would mean that we would be activating, see, the light aspect of ourselves, which in itself is not human. You understand what I'm saying? There's an element of you and all of us that's going to get to a point where we reach the edge. See, this is the edge. This door's open. So think of all of this is revolving, right? And then things open up where all of this portals is open. Where you could just, boom, keep going. Because there is no end. At the root, we're all Polarian. At the root, we're all Atlantean. In the root, you see what I'm saying? Which means that we're what? All Moors. That's why the prophet said there's only two races of people on the planet. See what I'm saying? Asiatic and a European. See what I'm saying? The Atlantean and the Lemurian. This is what's warring. This is who's killing. This is what's coming out. This is why we've been able to be subdued. But the Aryans, these white people, that's the mask for these black people is thing. But again, they got us thinking it's the opposite. That it's the white people, you know what I'm saying? It's the black people for them. It's both. But this system, this is what's backing all of the Freemasonic things that these people is doing, and it's channeled through all of the fake spirituality movements and stuff that they've been popping. Understand? Look. Big up to brother's name. His brother Wally Scott Beck. He did a great joint he sent me. He did, and I just wanted to show this part of it. He said he'd been watching me for a couple of years, so big up to him. Thank you for the support. Just wanted to show you what he pointed out with these descriptions of the so-called Egyptians, who again are Atlanteans. You see what I'm saying? Who would then who replaced the Lemurians. So when you read in Egyptian culture, there was a great time of upheaval in which a group of people came out of nowhere, who they collectively called the Sea Kings. All right, and they just came through and just wrecked shop. And it wasn't for Ramses, the whole thing would have been shut down. This is where these people was coming from, who they're descended from. Because again, the genetic aspect of life is what is pushing all things. And the energy that, again, pulsed this is what created the dual systems. So what we see, our planet started out as individual suns that split into a male and a female. So what we see as Mars and Venus was actually really one thing. And that was split into a male and a female. You see? Same thing now with Jupiter and Saturn. And each one split at the end of the 25,000 years. Or what they say is 24,000. You see? So at the split, you get two suns. Things go binary. And what's happening now? Saturn and Jupiter is coming close as they've ever been since they've been taken apart. You understand? So Mars and Venus, again, that we see as Mars and Venus is actually the sun and moon of the ring in whatever section of the world you at. You see? But to us, is Mars and Venus. But to them, is, you see what I'm saying? It's whatever they call it. And then they have a solar system and a sun and a moon and all of the rotation and all of that around that. So those barriers become weak around this time because we're at the end. And when was the Yakub experiment started? 6,000 years ago, right? Which was the last 6,000 years of 24,000 cycle, right? Right? See, look, beloved one, Mer. Now we just read Maghreb, Mer, Mor, Palerme, the high priest of Anu, right? The beloved one, the title of the several gods. The title of the several gods. The meteoric form of Osiris. The Moric, the Maoritic, which is basically Moorish, the Moorish form of Osiris. That's Obatala. Look at pictures of Obatala with the turban and the white. That's what they're about. They're there to try to lock us in and activate the nano stream that they put in the vax. It's facts. This is not, they can't make it conspiracy. Even when they use the term conspiracy theory, you understand that goes back to a CIA document, 1035-960. Look it up. That says how and why it should be used and how anybody that uses it is an unknowing agent of them. So you already outed yourself. See, this is where the Moors come in. So all these Kemites and all of that, like if it wasn't for us, they wouldn't even know how to write this stuff. Understand? Look, Berber, on the pyramid. The bull god form of Osiris, which means Mithra, right? Which means the Mithratic. That's why they call wearing the fez in ancient times the Mithratic sacrifice. Because you sacrifice your vanity for only your beloved to see your hair. Look, the serpent. The serpent kept that Edfu, the protecting spirit of inundation. Look at the serpent. But what does it say in the Bible? It says, thus saith the Lord God, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and thy father Nachor, and they served other gods. And I took your father Abraham, and from the other side of the flood led him throughout all of the lands of Canaan. Islam, which means that the lands of Canaan were firmly established. He didn't know where he was at. He was brought. Somebody showed him how you move here, right? This is how you make it happen when you come to this side. And then basically took that same aspect over to the other. And different aspects of our people through the genetic periods, there were sub races that came in between that. When I say sub, I don't mean under necessarily. I mean that they were from a different, they were an admixture. And every so often, this genetic need to move forward or create this thing to create the new epoch then happens. So according to today's system, you got two more, you see, that's supposed to come to get rid of the so-called Aryan. Because remember, the original Aryans was black Germans under black Hitler and black Himmler. And all of these white staged events that we see and have accepted as history have become the same noose around our neck because now don't even know. Remember, most of these battles that happened was segregated, and the blacks were limited into limited intel, and they were given limited jurisdiction. So when you think of Coptic, that's really ancient Indian. In ancient times, it was Indian, or better yet, Hindu. The Hindu became what we call or ushered in the Aryan situation, which is why Hannibal and them, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, wanted to shut that down through the people under them, who we call the Macedonians. You see? Read the history. Alexander's father was a vassal of Carthage. And we see how big the Carthaginians was. There was no Greece. Serpent people was everywhere. It was us, wherever we was at. And the Bible has said that we come as a serpent, but are as gentle as a dove. This is us. So this so-called ascension or alignment, whatever you're talking about, whether it happens or not, it's happening. It's already happened in the cosmic sense. We're just catching up to the physical time. Like when they say, when you put time, you see a star, it's already gone. It's the same concept. So when we talk about melanin, we're really talking about polarians. You understand what I'm saying? Talking about vitamin D or whatever. We're talking about a multi-cosmic, microcosmic, macrocosmic entity that has an awareness. You know how it do? Because if you don't lotion it, right, it look rusty, right? When you are in the sun and it's hot, you feel it, right? When it's real hot and you jump in the water and the water's cold, that instant change you feel is an alchemical process that is enhanced with the experience, because the melanin brings out the rhythm. The overt melanin is the rhythm in the biochemical or alchemical reaction or action. The rhythm is the electricity that sparks the thing, and that's what creates the luciferase. You understand? And that goes into the blood, which then can be directed based upon how it's injected into the blood, through fear, through happiness, through joy. So when you look at these buildings, you got to understand that they're built on top of what was already here. None of them have real bottoms the way that you think they do, or I think they do. For instance, this is an example of what I mean. Is it at? Wow. Okay. Here we go. We don't see the full weight of it all because we are looking at everything from the bottom, and we was attacked by the lower class aspect of their society at the rise of these people. That's why they were given reign and groomed by people that look like us. That's why Atlantis is so revered in modern culture, because those Atlantean priests that was basically into the germ mixing and all of that, these are the ones that was basically the Yakub ones, which is why it all fell and got destroyed, and then their remnants went into darkness. So you have 4 ages. You have the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver, and the Gold, and then the Gilded. So this is what they dealing with. That's why you have basements and sub basements and basements. They done redone in all of this. See, this is just the top of something like this. this is exactly what I'm saying about this time that we're in. It's all coming out, so there's no need. This right here is called the Cornhusk Palace. This was one of the palaces of the ancient theosophic chiefs. It was built out of corn. And I don't know if it's still there, but it was built with all natural materials, with corn specifically. And this is what the Thessaloniki ruled that dominion from. So you could imagine how far this goes down and how big these Thessaloniki was. Let's look at the doorway still. Just with these people here, look how big the doorway is. You understand? So when you read about Jesus in the temple, in the upper room, he was actually in one of these. These are the only artifices that had these at the top at the time. Look at, what was I gonna say? Anybody have any questions? John the Moor. So they did things to get rid of the real descendants and people that had those types of genes, like how they did in Africa with the Nilo people or the Nilotic people, to breed them out, to keep them from being so dark and so tall. They did the same thing here. So there really is no difference, as what's his name, Arthur C. Clarke said. There's really no difference between magic and science. It just depends on how high you are in understanding what's going on. We're already where we read and have read about. And so what they've done is make it so our people have to get knowledge from other places about where we really are. This is a Minoan or Macedonian, people who was with who Alexander the Great represented. So you mean to tell me everybody was black for him? This is an elder from the Lenape. And look, he got the royal colors, but they colored him in the royal colors of red and green. Understand? The original New England that they set up was in California, but then it was called New Albion. So when they talk about how the G7 Lodge had to go to England or had to go to Albion to get their charter in order to set up the Prince Hall Lodge, this is where they go, or this is where they went, because they had an agreement with the Queen and the Sultan, because they proved they was Hebrews by crossing over the Red Sea. See? So when Spain took Grenada again, it happened in what we call New Mexico, which can also be referred to as Central Africa or Mauritania. Next week, I'll have a list of all of the names of the original places where you at and what they was called in reality. So so when they talk about Numidia and all of that's over here. So when you read the book Golden Trade of the Moor, and they use terms like Numidia and Mauritania and all of that, they talking about here. No place that's named what it is was named that prior to Reconstruction. And Reconstruction was a variant based upon what happened in the Carrington event, which was an after effect of the New Madrid earthquake. That was lumped into history as the Civil War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, the Reconstruction, segregation, Jim Crow, and everything since. See, this is why it's Central Africa. That's why I showed you that. So everything the Prophet Noble Ali wrote about was correct, right and exact, and everybody basically bit and tried to set their joint up after. The development of the MSTA saw the influence of many high-degree black Shriners, Masons, and secret societies, particularly the ancient Egyptian Arabic order of nobles of the mystic shrine, started by Noble Ali Rolfelt Pasha and John Green Jones in 1893. See that? In 1893. These secret societies played a major role in the events during the 20s and 30s and the governmental changes in America that have great importance in happenings presently. See? Exactly. Because when you look at the tribe of Ben Ishmael, which goes from the early 1700s, it has the Moorish Science Temple on it, which is crazy. So when we talk about, again, the tribe of Ben Ishmael, these are all just different codes for the same thing. But when we speak of the United States specifically, we're speaking of a federal, for us, the United States of America, we're talking about a federal republic that was formed after the War of Independence and made up of the 41 conterminous states, plus the state of Alaska and the District of Columbia in North America, plus the state of Hawaii in the Pacific. This is the 48 to 51 star flag. This was when it was still black, so-called melanated. There you go. So this is the one we dealing with. These other people, I don't know what they talking about. And we're protected or guaranteed this form of government. But that doesn't mean that that is the government that we have to have allegiance to be here. Do you understand? So long as we are not combatants to it, which we're not, we are non-enemy combatants in amity. Because we can affect treaty reprisal through the initial party, which in some cases is France, in some cases is Spain, and then get them to do what we need to do, or get them to do what has to happen with the United States. However, to do that, we have to be in our proper capacity. So to close, showed this in the Queen Pope thing, but I want to show it again. That's what I'm talking about with the Dark Ages. While the populace of Rome was amused by the scandal of the female pope, During this period of intellectual stagnation, the Moorish princess of Spain and Sicily, see what Spain and Sicily is, right? Here in America, alone among the sovereigns of the West, meaning what? What does Maghreb mean? What does Moor mean? West, right? People from the West kept alive the sacred fires of art, science, philosophy. Yes, because we freaked it and got a female pope in there, and then they shut it down for almost 2,500 years. The only way they could have any type of thing was through us. See, through the great schools of learning, the Moors taught Christendom. That means wherever Christians was at, they was taught by the original Moors. Meaning that they converted back, they were going into now the science of the race that they were supposed to replace, you see? Or who they was replacing genetically, spiritually. To the Englishman Almahad, Alderd, both Reed of Reading, Daniel Morley, William Shelley, the Italian Gerard Simona, Al-Huzen's works were used in the textbooks of Andalusian colleges and the University of Cordoba. The scholar Pope Gerbert, who was Sylvester II. All of these is black people. So when they say who shut Rome down, the Moors, and then who set it up? The Moorish queen from Sicily, which we'll get into. Anybody have any last questions before we close out? I would definitely lay off any like heavy flesh, heavy metals, like stuff like that. Definitely exercise, workout, which I need to do more. What else? Filtering out any negative, bad energy, good house cleaning. You know what I'm saying? Being around energy around those dates that are conducive to your spiritual growth and not negative towards that. Avoiding conflict. Getting whatever crystals and stuff resonate with you. Doing a spiritual bath from goat's milk for like 7 days straight, but if you miss a day, start over. 7 days. You know what I'm saying? Fasting. Yes, the Swarthi Peat ritual is again a reminiscent of the Moors bringing the Caucasians out of the cave and giving them the gift of life. So even though that's why Santa is cool, but Swarthi Peak is all the love and people dress up as him because he was there to civilize them and give them civilization as they left the cave. You understand? So that's really a part of their history where they descend from the troll. Like in Norway, they got trolls. Like it's real. Like there's real troll. They got troll traps. They got troll hunters. They got all of that out there in the remote areas. You know what I mean? And due to the changes, a lot of these things is coming out. So they gotta mask it as like other stuff. They'll set up a whole war just to, cover themselves while they're going in a nest trying to figure out what's what, and what they can salvage and take back and do experiments and stuff on. Like all the stuff that we have always assumed is just whatever is all of the stuff these niggas been doing. See? So as Atlantis is now the Atlantean phase gave way to the Aryan, the culmination of that was the Hitler, black Hitler versus white Hitler thing. And then that culminated into the enslavement of all of the other European and the blackmail and exile of them. You know, like this guy who's in the Central African Republic. This is what I mean about one of the old ones that's posing as a African-born descendant joint. He obviously then descended from the Europeans that came in, blacks that was there that left, oh excuse me, that had to stay, and basically became a perpetual monarchy. So he forced a nation of school children to buy expensive uniforms from a company he owned, and when they didn't do it, he allegedly killed 100 of them. But look at the guard. Okay. So if we do the research on him, we'll probably find out that he's descended from Henry III or one of these people. Understand? That's why they keep causing the beef, because they're not really from there. They just married into the tribes, took over, posed as the whack ones, and then, you know, the overseers, and then just had to stay because the white people wouldn't let them back into Europe. Hence the last king of Scotland. Anybody else? I think it's great. I think, you know, but she with them people, so I don't know how, you know. The goal is to, again, establish and use the fact that they created a genome thing to isolate this specifically. So because it has these foreign elements in it, there has to be a contingency against it. And the people ain't gonna stand for it. Not here. I saw a joint where they actually microscoped it and you could see the nanites going around and moving around in the damn injection. So this is going to be a suggestive thing that they're going to try to make mandatory to try to force people into confrontation, and everything's going to go wrong for them. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. All we got to do is keep focusing on what we're doing, man. I'm telling you. Because the people aren't unified until something drastic happens. And you're dealing with people who have crossed DNA and annexed DNA. Don't even know it. So they work against themselves. They're trying to bleach themselves out. Because they all from the Aryan perspective, which is caste system, subduing the darkness, and creating perpetual servitude. So you see here, it says this continent with the adjoining islands is generally reported to have been anciently unknown, though there are not wanting home who still have even the continent is felt to be no other than the island of Atlantis of the ancients. See? It's going back to 1400s. That's what the Caribbean islands, the Antilles, that's what all of that is. So that's it concerning that. Anybody want to hit me up at houseofl@hotmail.com. Anybody have any last questions? So when these white people, and you go and read about these things I'm talking about in these different orders, this is where all these sacrifices and these rituals is about. This is what they're striving to do, to perfect the Aryan race, to make it totally bleached with the melanin. That's why I like the bald eagle, because it got a white head with a black body. Understand? Yeah, man. There's something called the International Contradiction Vaccine Waiver. Brother talking about it. Um, I think anybody in a higher perspective can benefit if they tap into the higher aspect of that, which is the polarity, which is us as polarians. See what I'm saying? Moors. You know what I mean? The polarity, or the higher self or the lower self. See what I'm saying? Part of us that's not even human. You know what I'm saying? So we go from red to blue to red. I mean, to brown. Because this is where stuff started rusting. And now it went petrified during the Aryan race. Now we're moving into the future and they're trying to manipulate what's going to be the next two. So this is where all our coming. We coming. So this is what all the occultic BS and all of these sacrifices and all this gematria and all of this crap is them trying to manipulate. The Collider is trying to tap into the variant universes where the Lemurians won and they was white and all this crap. I believe every physical being has the potential to tap into the highest aspect of itself. However, that's derivative upon the individual and their understanding of self. So, yes, but you can grow chakras like you grow hair. So, you can have multiple chakras open, and each chakra then represents an aspect on a tree, which is an aspect of the molecule, which is the singularity, which is the higher self. Dendrites, definitely aspects of the materials that represent time. There's a connection to them and the Dendara time counter. Yep. Yeah, it makes sense. So get some dendrite, get a dendrite crystal, and then get you a image of the dendrite calendar, put the crystal in the middle, start to do your work with that. Put yourself on a 28-day cycle, so every 29th day is the first day of the new month. That's moving ahead in time on an incremental level. And then pattern your bill cycle or whatever if you in conjunction with. Therefore, you'll always be ahead. All right. So Islam, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed it and understand what the ultimate goal of this is and how we can start to take advantage of it. And anybody wants to hit me up again about the individual estate planning or nationality and stuff like that, hit me up at houseofl@hotmail.com. Probably by next class. All right. Islam.